of just kind of juice making, I guess, that's really popular in Nicaragua because of the water problems there, because filtered water isn't really readily available. It's always made warm, and then you just put in ice right at the end, and it gives it this kind of weird texture. Because you can taste like kind of the colder liquid floating on the warm. So you'll see in a second. This is just flavored with some citrus. It's lemon, lime, grapefruit, orange, and a little strawberry. So my senior year project was more of a cultural study than a study of food. It was just kind of an exploration of nutritional anthropology and the connection between kind of societies by their cuisine. So it's all yours. There you go. All right. So you four need to fight over these two, I guess. Sorry? All right. It's for you too. Sorry. All right. You sure? Okay, perfect. Well, that's all yours.
No, I'll take it.
All right, thank you. Yep, so you can see it's purified water just floating on top of the juice, so if you mix it up, get all the flavors going, that's perfect. Yep, so my senior project was a study of nutritional anthropology, which is just kind of the relationship between people, their societies, and what they eat. Sorry? Oh, okay. Yep, the relationship between people and what they eat and how, their society progresses and how they, make political reforms, cultural reforms, especially for reforms to their food and how they cook. So my project was kind of composed of two elements: my product, which was my cookbook, and a research paper on about specifically how analogous structures appear in these different societies through their food, how things. Like a great example is in America we have just basic pancakes. We have flapjacks. That came from the Dutch panakakwa, which is really popular all through Scandinavia and through the northern areas like that. But at the same time, a couple thousand miles away in India, dosas, which is like a flatbread made of rice, is the same principle. In Mexico, they have tortillas. Southeast Asia, just like dosas in India, they use rice to kind of make a meal and form it into a patty. So this structure of like a flattened meal-based food is present everywhere. So that's kind of what I was taking that idea that these same styles of cooking and these same methods pop up all over the place, and it's isolated from one another, and just kind of how that works to differentiate food and how food kind of develops from there. So my product and paper were both centered on research, active field work that I did during February, March, and April, as well as stuff that continued through my cooking. But in February, I was studying in France, in Paris, and in Savoy, in the southeast near Switzerland. And that was all about classical cuisine, and it just, even though I was doing both of I was researching towards these two different projects. So I was researching food that I could just cook myself and put in my cookbook, and I was also looking at the historical aspect of my paper and how, research that went into there about, food culture and food identity. So the paper was, for the most part, historical. I know food, I don't mean to brag or anything, I just know food really well. It's the kind of thing that I've just been studying independently since I can remember. So when I started doing my senior project, I wanted to research something that I didn't really have a strong base knowledge in, something that I wasn't really practiced in. So I chose food culture in South America, which I have almost no knowledge of. I just never cooked South American food, whether it's Mexican, Brazilian, Central American. I'm not familiar with it. And even historically, I've never taken a class about Mesoamerican studies or anything like that. So I kind of wanted to go into this so that I would have to be learning. And so I did a lot of heavy fact-based research, both abroad. When I was, my research abroad was really mostly just immersion. I was walking around eating whatever I could, basically. But at the same time, I was reading constantly. I read books in French. I tried reading a book in Spanish, and it didn't fare well because I don't speak Spanish. But yeah, so with my paper, I kind of wanted to study what this relationship was between society and big events in their history and their food. So I kind of worked through with my own experiences in conjunction with the active research that I did. So an example is in my paper I talk about why in France, especially in cities, there aren't really supermarkets or large grocery stores. Everything's divided into specialty stores. And the reason that is because starting with the days of Charlemagne in the early Middle Ages. Bakers, charcuteries, butchers, just all these shops, they were controlled by guilds. So it was illegal to produce anything more than this one good. So in France, they're popped with these very small bakeries that only sold certain loaves of bread, and there would be pastry shops that could only sell these, these gâteaux, these croissants, whatever they may be. So that kind of carried over, and even in Paris today, if you walk down any street, there's never, there's a Monoprix, that's the only supermarket, and it's kind of famous as being a supermarket. So that's kind of, a direct relationship of how I could study that here. So what ended up happening was in my research in Nicaragua, and through my research in France, I kind of noticed that both of these cultures, they're really based on a staple starch, and that's what sustains the society for the most part. In France, it's wheat through bread. They also eat pastas, obviously. And in Nicaragua, it's gallo pinto, which is a rice and beans dish. So aside from these staple starches, which are kind of bland, sugary foods, they provide the caloric background for a diet, but that's kind of it. They don't provide that much nutrition. So that kind of creates just a baseline for any society. Before that, they have kind of a standardized food. It's hard to develop a cuisine. And after that, events like foreign invasion, especially in Mesoamerica, foreign invasion in terms of colonization of the mother country for France, all of these factors really led to the differentiation of the foods. So that's kind of what created, why we have haute cuisine, which is this really high, concentrated form of French cooking. But we also have, people still eating gallo pinto, which is the basic staple of Nicaraguan life. So, yep, the staple starch, it's a widely produced crop. It's easily produced. It provides, like I said, caloric help, but that's kind of it. It's not really vitamin rich. So examples are, like I said, gallo pinto in Nicaragua, wheat in France, corn is really popular in southern Mexico and southern central Mexico and northern Central America. Rice in Southeast Asia, that's sticky rice and mango that I made. So this is kind of, it's all over the place. It's hard to imagine for Americans because I was reading Leah Sepko's paper, and there's this part, it said that there's thousands of items in any grocery store, and America is based on, like I said, not specialty stores or not self-sustained farming. It's all grocery stores. Everyone goes and buys their food and prepares it. So we're not used to eating the same thing every day just for every meal. We, if you say that to anyone, they think it would get boring or something. But that's just kind of how these societies work, is that the assumption is with any meal you're going to eat some of this. So like I said, in France, every morning we would wake up, have a baguette with Nutella for breakfast, and then for lunch we would have a sandwich on a baguette, and then for dinner we would have pasta, which is flour-based with a baguette. And in Nicaragua, we would wake up in the morning and have gallo pinto and scrambled eggs. And for lunch, we would have gallo pinto and some fish and plantains. And then for dinner, we would have gallo pinto with chicken or with steak. So it really is the heart of these societies. So what kind of drives these different cuisines apart is agriculture and technology has a huge role. So something I looked at in my paper was farming techniques in the Americas and how those developed, because during in the 16th century and way before that, starting in I think the 12th century, the Incas in Peru, they had a really complex farming method. They farmed potatoes mainly. That's kind of where potatoes come from before they spread to Europe. But they had kind of a socialized network of farming. So because people in the Inca society, farmers or whatever, they would harvest their potatoes and it would all be collectivized. So that it was evenly distributed, and it's amazing because it worked perfectly. And you can see collectivized farming in Russia and China failed miserably, but the Incas were able to succeed for hundreds of years. So because they had that advanced agricultural technique, they had a surplus of food. And in these societies, especially in the Incan it's most visible, but with the Aztecs too, they had a farming system called chinampas, which was these floating fields in salt marshes. They also used terracing, but and as well as in France, a huge development was the windmill, because they could be willing more flour, make more bread. So these they seem somewhat minor technological advances. They make huge, they enormously benefit the native country's cuisine, because when you have an excess of the staple crop, you can rely more on other foods, just because you know that no matter what happens, you're going to have some bread, or you're going to have some rice, or you're going to have some potatoes. So through this surplus, it becomes easier to kind of play around with what other foods you have and domesticate other crops that you have to kind of breed these new variants of additive flavors. Agricultural developments can also include domestication of animals. The Aztecs, they didn't really, it was mostly farming based, but they also domesticated dogs, turkeys, and these little sea fish. They're called axolotls. I mean, it's a little strange, but so they did domesticate animals, but that was kind of a minor part. And you can see even Mexican diet today, it's not hugely based on cattle or pork. I mean, they're obviously big players because people eat meat, but the remnants of this traditional style of kind of not having a meat-based diet has carried over. Another example of how agricultural advances have aided culinary development is in France in the 17th century under Louis XIV. There was this was kind of at the end of the guild stage. The guilds lasted until the end of the Ancien regime with the French Revolution. So, you know, no one was allowed to have multiple specialty stores still. But this was at a time when, even though France was at war, it was really big under Louis XIV to glorify the nation. So, you know, he transformed this little the hunting lodge that was Versailles into the enormous palace that it is today. There were huge methods to just kind of glorify Paris, and he really wanted to just make the French nation more of something that stood out more. Because at the time, I mean, French cuisine hadn't really developed that much. Even though it was bread-based, that's kind of it. It was no better than, you know, Italian food or English food or food anywhere in Western Europe that was a wheat-based society. So in 1693, a chef called La Varenne, he was a pastry chef under Louis XIV at Versailles. He published the first cookbook, and this was right at a time, like I said, when, you know, food was pretty bountiful. Even though the country was slowly going into debt, no one really realized it yet. So everyone thought, you know, we're glorifying the nation. We're spreading the idea of French, like the French savoir-faire. So then in 1694, there was famine in France. And no one really likes that ever. Because when there's, like I was saying, how when the staple starch is plentiful, culinary advancements, they kind of come really rapidly because everyone's playing with food. This is kind of the opposite. Flour production in the late 1690s up until 1710 was really awful in France. And even though the idea of the cookbook had been presented by La Varenne, he was the first person to write one, even though that had been published, it wasn't really, it didn't really continue until later into the 18th century, just because of this kind of halt. And famine, this is what I really wanted to get into with my relationship between historical events and food development, is this, and how, you know, something as minor as, it seems minor, famine, as, you know, it's something that can enormously change the course of a country. This famine only lasted from 1690 to 1710, so that got into the reign of Louis XV. But later on in the 1780s, there was another famine under Louis XVI, and that lasted for 4 or 5 years. And at the same time, everyone was there was this huge political unrest because no one was eating. And at the same time, under Louis XIV and Louis XVI, there was this idea that the upper class was kind of gaining control, and that, you know, the king was always eating. He would have these lavish feasts of 8 courses with 5 dishes each. A dish could be, you know, 3 turkeys. So he would sit down every morning and, you know, munch away while the rest of the nation is starving. 2 million people died in the 17th century famine, and another million in the 18th century. So this disrest, which was driven by the lack of bread, ultimately, kind of continued and fueled French displeasure until the French Revolution in 1789, which started with the storming of the Bastille. Another way that famine and poverty kind of play a role in the development of cuisine is Nicaragua is a great example, because in it, I was in Pacific Nicaragua in the southeast, in San Juan del Sur. When we traveled up to the Atlantic side, you could really see how big of a role poverty played in just the average life. Rice, gallo pinto, like I was saying, is still the staple food. That's all throughout Nicaragua and Costa Rica, just because rice and beans are really readily available, and the two of them provide for almost all the vitamin needs that you need of a person. But in these regions where, you know, other foods aren't that available, tropical fruits, you know, things that are tropical fruits, domesticated animals that are really they're around in the southeast just because it's slightly warmer and it's coastal. But when you get into central and Atlantic Nicaragua, there's none of that. So they're relying completely on rice and beans, basically. There was a school, I don't know if you all saw Danya's presentation just a few minutes ago, but there was a school, Capulin, that we went to, and they did this when I was in Nicaragua, and they did this thank you ceremony where it was considered like a huge festival, and the big deal was that they flavored their gallo pinto with chicken. That was like, to show off, they just put some meat in their food. So it kind of puts into perspective the difference between how we see hunger and how we see kind of an unbalanced diet versus them. Especially since we don't have this staple crop, it's kind of the only analogous situation is drought, really, for us. It's like, if you could imagine, you know, when the water went out a few weeks back, everyone was going crazy, buying water bottle all over the place. No one could drink the water. Imagine that happening for 5 or 6 years. So that kind of puts into perspective what kind of anger and what kind of and you know, imagine if at the same time Seti Warren was drinking bottle after bottle from the tap. You know, you wouldn't really understand what the situation was. So that's kind of an analogous situation to what was happening in France and what is still happening in Nicaragua, where there's this political and civil unrest because of lack of food or water. So in addition to my project, I also wrote a internationally themed cookbook. It's in the form of a wiki. And the point of my wiki, this cookbook, is kind of to tie together international cuisine and these foreign techniques with what's kind of beginning to sprout in America. Like I was saying, because we don't have a staple crop, America's cuisine is always seen as kind of disjointed and is just kind of an amalgamation of all of these foreign influences. But if you look down into it, I mean, using American techniques, American agriculture, even though crops that have originated in Americas, like potatoes and tomatoes and avocado, even though those all transferred over to the rest of the world, they're congenital, I guess, not congenital. They originate from the Americas. It's part of our heart, kind of what's naturally available and what we work with. So that's, I wanted to, with my product, deviate from the burgers and fry models, where it just seems like American food is this greasy, fast food, you know, meat-based diet, where nothing can really be refined or seen as more than just, you know, just American food. It's like American food is seen as, you know, just being kind of grubby. It's like beach food. So my product kind of wanted to get away from that. Oh, that's charming. Hold on 1 second. It's called breakfast, lunch, and dinner to encompass every meal. Oh, that's, yep. Oh, and, all right, perfect. Beautiful. So this is, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. Oh, it's a little weird. Okay. Well, this is it. It's kind of hard to see right now. So this is just about the cookbook. All of my recipes were inspired by my experiences abroad and just kind of dinner time here. So even though my recipes might, you know, I have a recipe for creme fraiche ice cream that I found out was similar to this one that on a blog on, you know, the internet. It's just, I kind of am trying to take all of these influences. While I was creating my cookbook, I looked at, you know, internet blogs and internet recipe sites and all of that stuff. And there was a lot of times where I would just see a recipe and think to myself, like, why are they doing this? You know, like, why would they cook it that way when you can cook it this way? So I was taking recipes like that and cooking them and preparing them for my family and, you know, impartial judges, just to see how I can make basically everything better and how I can put my own twist on it. The cookbook it really is, even though it's designed to be created by a couple contributors, it's just me right now, so you can really see my cooking voice in it, I guess. I don't like celery is a great example of how that's visible, and I think there's maybe 2 recipes in here that have celery just because I don't really want to eat it, so why would I, you know, cook it for myself? So that's kind of something I really worked with, developing my own culinary voice through this project. Everything in it is kind of connected, and it's all done through like searching. So the recipe that I'm about to prepare is for a mixed greens and a balsamic vinaigrette salad. So that's what we have right here. And if you look at it, all of these little terms on the sides, like chiffonade. Chiffonade comes from the French chiffon, which means like ragged strips of fabric. And so all of this brings you around to a glossary, and it's all connected, and there's, you know, all of these terms. I'm still working on it, obviously, but the idea is that even someone who's not a seasoned chef, someone who hasn't, you know, been walking around and eating everything in sight in Nicaragua and in France can still make these recipes, and it's an Americanized version, and it's all produced with available ingredients, so it's not something that's, you know, it's not really high fancy food, but it tastes great. It's kind of the point. That's kind of the point to my cookbook, that it's easy to make food, but it's not, you know, you don't need to be Wolfgang Puck or anything. So right now, I have a quick mixed green salad. It's I'm using Mexican greens, basil, baby spinach, and I usually use arugula, but it didn't look too good yesterday, so I just decided to go without it. So this salad, I actually had it in Savoy. It was something similar, made with frisée, which is this really bitter, it's like a really bitter kind of stringy green. I didn't really like it, honestly. I like the dressing. It's a reduced balsamic glaze, but I thought, you know, you can really just use better herbs, use fresher ingredients, and it'll be great. So this, you can taste the French, I guess kind of the Frenchness of it. It uses, you know, really heavily reduced balsamic vinegar, which is a, it's kind of gives the food a sweetness, but it's very acidic too. It's also flavored with shallot, which I have right here, which I'm just going to thinly slice. And the shallot kind of balances more than anything the vinegar in the food, because even though it is a sweet reduction, it has that strong acidic flavor that I was talking about. So you want to try and balance that and kind of combat that with the sweetness of the shallot. I actually, last night I was preparing all of this just because I wanted to be fresh, and I didn't want it, you know, sitting around for a few days. So last night I was making a balsamic reduction just for the week, because I use it in a lot of food for dinner, just because I cook meals every night. So I was reducing this huge pot of balsamic vinegar, and I know I needed some for today. So this is actually, what I made is infused with a little shallot, because I like, when I use it at home, I just like it to be a little sweeter. So it has the added flavor of the shallot as well as the flavor infused in the vinegar. Sorry? Absolutely, yeah. It's weird. I didn't really do that much before I was doing senior project. I've always cooked for my family just because I like doing it, and I don't know, I think it's better than when my mom cooks. So, yeah. I am a culinary major. I'm up there, actually 0 blocks now, but I used to be a 3-block major up in the loft. I'm taking the year off next year. I'm hoping to do some food work in Southeast Asia. I'm trying to travel there. I don't know if that's realistic, though. But I am definitely looking at hotels and food management and restaurant work later on in life. When I was in Nicaragua, this is kind of what got me interested in the idea of hotel development. It sounds really awful because you see these in San Juan del Sur, because it's the only real tourist village in Nicaragua. It's where all the white people go. It's where all the Americans go. You know, it's basically like it's just turning into a surf town now, if that makes sense, in just kind of the urbanization timeline. It's not quite a tourist town yet, but you go there and there are these enormous hotels. It's ridiculous. You see, it's literally like up on the hill. There's these American sponsored hotels that, even though they employ a few people from the area, all they really do is they drive down property prices, and this is a little reduced balsamic vinegar that I was talking about. It's kind of sweetened. It's pretty good. And so what I was talking about earlier was, oh yeah, hotels. So these hotels, they rise up, and they're really cheap to produce. They employ locals for almost nothing. It's horrible, honestly. employ locals for nothing, just so that they can run, a really successful, low overhead business in Nicaragua. So while I was there, I was kind of looking at that and seeing how you can take the idea, because hotels there, they always say, we're employing people in the city, we're urbanizing the city, providing, now there's more fresh water because there have to be deliveries every day. So there are some good factors, and what I kind of want to do just in life is kind of go into some degree of hotel management or hotel development, and especially focus on like third world development, and just how you can take the principle of those principles that where development is ultimately good for the nation or the city or region, whatever it may be, and kind of see how you can do that without forcing a city to rapidly urbanize, because that's kind of what's happening in San Juan del Sur. All of a sudden, people are expected to, give up their houses because they don't have a deed for it, things like that. It's just minor stuff that's easily preventable, but it's just because of the nature of their society, it's impossible to prevent it. I mean, it's not impossible to prevent it right now, but it's easy to exploit. So that's basically what I want to do with the food industry. All right, so for this vinaigrette, I'm just drizzling in some olive oil just to thicken it up. It's not emulsified, so it's not a creamy dressing. It's just a light vinaigrette, something before lunch. If you see in that recipe, when I had it in France, in Savoy, it was served on the side. I had it with this dish, actually, it's called raclette. You've had it? Familiar? Raclette. I didn't really like it, honestly. I'm not sure what type of cheese it is, but they take the half a wheel of a really sharp Swiss cheese, not Swiss cheese as we know, it's just a cheese from Switzerland. And it's melted on this grill, and it's picked off and put on potatoes. I didn't really care for it, but it's a traditional, hearty, southeastern French dish. So I had this on the side, but today, just because, I don't know, I didn't eat breakfast, I'm a little hungry. So I'm making it just with some grilled chicken. I just grilled it off last night with a little olive oil, salt and pepper. Nothing too fancy. Where is that, by the way? There's also a little bit of orzo. I usually use, actually, Israeli couscous or quinoa. It's just I kind of like the taste of the grain better. I'm looking at this. I might not even use it right now, just because the pasta looks a little dry. But it's good just to add some starch to the to the food, even though you have a more hearty, bolder kind of texture from the chicken. It's nice to always have a little pasta in there. So let's just toss that in, break it up a little more while it's in there. So this is, I feel like I'm forgetting something. I am. Also just going to throw in a little dried basil and dried oregano. I did, like I said, I did the basil chiffonade. I did that last night and mixed it in with the herbs just so that the flavor, basil is really aromatic. So when you cut it up into a chiffonade, which is these thin strips, like I was saying, when you do a chiffonade, you can actually store it with whatever food you're going to be making it before. I've been baking it with before. So, I mean, with the salad, I just stored it with the greens, and the flavor of the basil, because it just carries so well, it kind of flavors the greens a little bit, which is always good. My food, I wanted to focus on having layers of flavor instead of just having, one food right in front. I don't like, this is again my kind of culinary voice, how I developed as a chef through this. I'm sorry, I completely forgot what I was about to say.
Oh, how you developed it.
Yep, how I developed as a chef. Part of it is that, don't worry, I'm clean. Sorry, this is so weird. Yeah, something that I kind of worked with as I made more food was creating layered dishes, and something that's not, just chicken or just steak. Just like how I don't like celery, I don't like chicken that tastes like chicken. I don't like potatoes that taste like potatoes. I always want to kind of take what I have and see how I can work with it to just make something better. So let me see. I have 4 plates, but I can make 6 somehow, I think. Just clear off this area a little bit. All right, perfect. All right. I'm sorry about that. Let me just do a quick. Yep, absolutely. So that kind of wraps it up for product and paper. Yeah.
So what was your conclusion that each culture had a staple in their, presumably developed had a staple product?
Yeah, what I was kind of focusing on was that we are different in that way that we don't have this staple starch, and that's, for the most part, what unites foreign foods, is that they have a simple base, something that's just used for every dish, and in addition to that, there's flavorings like just whatever's locally available in terms of agriculture. There's also the foreign influence that I was talking about, how conquest, especially in Latin America, how that leads to the introduction of new crops, that leads to the introduction of new foods. In Mexico, for example, there wasn't really any sugared food until the Spaniards arrived, because there wasn't much kind of trade with Pacific islands where sugar was naturally grown. Sorry, Pacific. I'm not sure what I'm talking about. Atlantic, Caribbean islands where sugar was grown. The Aztecs domesticated bees for honey, but that's kind of it. So when something new appears, these cultures find themselves radically changing, and something that was just a rice and beans society is now making flan and queso fresco and eggs benedict, or huevos rancheros. So all these sort of what we think of as national favorites that aren't really based in thousands of years of eating.
And you said something about flat food.
Yep.
So it's easier to travel if you're nomadic.
Sorry?
You said something about the flat. Did you mean flat as F-L-A-T?
Yeah, I was just using that as an example of how analogous structures appear in different societies with pancakes and with, I wish I had some gloves right now, I'm sorry, with pancakes and with crepes and panakakwa and, rice cakes, all of that, how these different structures, just in the same way that all humans kind of live in houses or some kind of structure like that, none burrow, just kind of how these structures appear. Yeah.
Did you notice or see any impact on how the health or conditions of the society may have changed?
Yeah, I looked at that, and that's especially in when I was just doing my reading and research, not active field work. I noticed, especially in Southeast Asia, the differences in kind of standards of cleanliness. Like Singapore, they're known as one of the cleanest countries in the world now, but historically they aren't. So I did look at how health factors in, especially water in Nicaragua, because the water crisis there, just kind of how these environmental factors, where some goods just aren't available or some goods are tainted, kind of how that affects what you eat. Another example that I found in my research was actually in the Bible, in Leviticus, there's all those sections. That's the part that has all these sections on what you can and can't eat, and kind of what is good and what's godly. And that, as there's the religious basis, obviously, but at the same time, if you look at a lot of those foods and you look at the desert culture of the Middle East that kind of was growing at the time, it makes sense that you wouldn't want to eat shellfish that had been sitting out in the 98-degree heat all day. You wouldn't want to eat pork, because pork can kill you a lot of the time. So environmental factors like that did play a role in my research, but they're not really visible in my paper. All right. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.